Hey everyone, I'm here today with Brian Hicks, who's one of the co-founders of Angel Publishing. He's an editor, copywriter, and I'd say you're kind of like you're the spiritual head of Angel Publishing. So I'm excited to be here in the office with you today and talk about the industry.
Oh, thank you, John. Yeah, I'm very happy.
Yeah, this is great. I actually want to start. I'm just going to jump into this. You've kind of got a thesis on, I'd say, the state of the industry, right? We've had a pretty rough year, but I think you have a view on things that is more fundamental than just, hey, we had a down cycle.
Right.
So do you want to kind of elaborate on that for everybody?
Absolutely, John. Are you familiar with the raging debate that's been going on for 100 years within the physics community?
Which one?
Well, okay, so in the past 100 years, there's been all these theories that have been sort of proven to explain how the universe works,
Mm-hmm.
you know, from gravity to, well, gravity is a lot longer than 100 years ago with Newton,
Right.
but the theory of relativity, the superstring theory, M theory, quantum mechanics, quantum theory, all of these theories independently sort of work. They kind of explain how the universe works. But the physics community wants to know like how all these theories sort of fit together and explain everything. And they call it the unifying theory. Some of them call it the theory of everything. Mm-hmm. And they haven't found it yet, okay?
Right.
But they're still trying, you know. And I think that is what's happening right now in our industry, is that we have all these moving parts. You know, they seem to work independently, but there's no sort of unifying theory. There used to be a unifying theory, but it's separated throughout the years. And what I believe, and this has been very pronounced in the past few years, is that our core industry, the industry that I cut my teeth on in 1994 and 1995, sort of lost its soul. We're in this middle of an identity crisis. We don't know who we are. What are we? And so it's been my mission lately to sort of unify, especially here at Angel Publishing, to unify, like, how do all of our services fit together in this one cohesive thing, this unifying theory? And it goes back to the very beginning. We were contrarians. Mm-hmm. We believed in sovereignty. We believe in the power of the individual, total control of your life, control of your wealth, control of your health, everything. And I think we need to get back to that, get back to the basics.
Okay, so I think that's actually like a very accurate description of where we are, but to unpack that a little bit more. So what you're saying then is that we look at the business as there's the marketing component. Are we marketers? Right, we're copywriters and marketers. There's the media buying. There's all the things that we know work there. There's the mechanics of the business that we know can make things work. And then you have all these different services and editors. Maybe there's a trend today that like you have to catch because that's where the acquisition is. So you throw some kind of products together. They just kind of serve that. But you end up in kind of like this hodgepodge of services and what the kind of classical, I always think of like this classical newsletter approach was like you're a publisher and that means something. And what it means, I think, is we have a view of the world through which everything else flows. Is that the essence of it? Or
Absolutely. When I started in the business in 94, 95 with Agora, and I was, listening to Bill Bonner all the time, there was a philosophical anchor to the to Agora. Mm-hmm. There was a certain set of axioms. And those axioms have seemed to have been brushed aside to go after the almighty buck, the quick sale, the get rich quick promos. Mm-hmm. We've lost sight of the customer, in my opinion. I think we've lost that connection with the customer. There has to be this sense of we're in it together. Mm-hmm. One of the great analogies that I use is, let's just say I'm your personal trainer. Okay, I can show you how to exercise. I can show you what to exercise. I can show you why to exercise. but I can't do the push-ups for you.
Right.
You had to do it yourself. And that's how I feel. That's our role here as newsletter editors, market analysts. A good example, John, I'm just going to divert a little bit about, this has been the age-old dilemma in our industry. Are we marketers or are we actually financial analysts? And about a year ago, in November of 2022, I did a podcast here in Angel. And I made a market call. I said, I think the markets are going to be up and up big in 2023. I also think cryptocurrencies are going to be up big in 2023. And this was in November. I made this call in November in 2022. As an investor, it was a great time to buy. Bitcoin doubled from there.
Right.
But was it a great time to be to promoting it in a promotion?
Not so much.
Not so much.
Not so much.
So that's where for me, for us as marketers, as market analysts, as publishers and editors, that's sort of the line that we try to walk. What's the best time to market a trend? And at Angel Publishing, we're great at trends. I like to say that when I talk to prospective customers and current customers, I tell them, when you subscribe to one of our services, it's akin to buying a futures contract for the future, because we are so good at predicting future trends. So,
yeah, no, you guys have had a very long track record of catching every trend to some point. It seems like in the industry. What I love about what you're saying though is this, because it is this: are we marketers or are we analysts? And the answer, I think, is we're publishers.
right.
And what that means is different than just one or the other. And kind of to your point, the having a worldview, having a perspective on not just the market, but kind of, I think there's an element of the world's chaotic. It's hard to understand. There's a lot of things that are happening, both good and awful, and that get people going. And what they're looking for is kind of a light to guide them through it and to put it into context.
Yeah. Absolutely. When you say we're publishers, I think we're also philosophers.
I love that.
And that's one of the challenges that we have as a publisher, is trying to convince our readers, hey, maybe this trend is not going to unfold right now, but it's going to unfold maybe 6 months from now, a year from now. We have a lot of slogans here at Angel Publishing, and one of the slogans is, we're herd leaders. We get to the good grass first. And if you look at some of the predictions that we've made on unfolding trends, we've been way ahead of the trend to the point where we had to wait. So in that slogan of getting to the good grass first, sometimes we identified where that farm is, but it hasn't sprouted any plants yet.
Right.
But we know it's going to sprout plants in the near future. Cannabis was probably the best example of that. We were in the Bitcoin too. We were talking about Bitcoin in 2010 and 2011.
Jeez. Wow.
And we weren't investing in it yet, but we were talking about it, that this could be possibly a game changer. But cannabis, we were investing in cannabis we were talking about cannabis in 2013, 2014, investing in it. It was flat for a while, then all of a sudden it was just an explosion.
Yeah.
And so,
well, can we go back to so how would you define kind of the essential worldview of, I'd say, the newsletter world, kind of the 90s, and then Angel Publishing today?
When I started out in this business, one of the things that Bill Bonner would always tell us was that we're alternative media, and I brought that philosophy to Angel Publishing when I started Angel Publishing in 2004. And what I meant by that, and I think what Bill means by that, is that we have the freedom, the liberty to really speak our minds, to really speak and analyze what we really do believe we see unfolding in the world today. And some of those things that we see are pretty scary and pretty dangerous. So dangerous and scary that the mainstream media, for whatever reason, can't or won't talk about it, but we can. A good example of that was in 2000. We built Angel Publishing really based on one prediction in the beginning, when that was peak oil, that we were running out of cheap, easy to get oil, and nobody was talking about that. Oil was still cheap; it was like $30 a barrel.
Wow.
And when we made that prediction, we were we were laughed at. We were called conspiracy theorists. But we looked at the numbers. We talked to people that were very, very dug in the industry, and there was things about decline rates. All these giant oil fields were going through catastrophic declines. There was no more giant discoveries. At the same time that China was rising, and so oil consumption, you could predict oil consumption was going to go through the roof, and so you had this perfect storm of declining reserves, declining discoveries, decline rates, at a time when the rest of the world was modernizing. So something had to give.
Right.
And luckily, from 2004 to 2008, oil just steadily rised. And we made a prediction that oil was going to rise to $150 a barrel, and it pretty much happened in 2008. So we're able, as an alternative media, to say things and to predict things that the mainstream media just can't. And maybe the government can't for various reasons. But we have the liberty and the passion. That's the important thing, is the passion. You have to believe what you're saying to do it and to say it.
That's a really, I think, important distinction to make between mainstream media and what we do. And I think going back to how, in the 90s you had the Iraq War started the 24-hour news cycle with CNN, right? That's when they launched. And that's kind of dominated everything now, to the point that most of the mainstream news, like when you watch the shows, it's either there's just kind of like general opinion, usually very polarized opinion. And then the other part of it almost seems to be they're going to report on press releases from either the government or from companies, and then alternate, like, competing press releases. And it's like there's not actually like that classic kind of like analysis of the news that you used to have back in the day when you had four anchors in the world. Even then you had a very, like, those guys had their particular worldview. And so I see kind of what you're talking about here with having an alternate worldview as there's an enormous amount of reality that's not being reported on, or not being reported on from an alternate perspective. It's just kind of like everybody jumps on a train and then they argue about, like, back and forth about the points on the train, and there's nobody telling the story underneath. And so from a newsletter perspective, it seems like what you do and what kind of Bonner does in particularly in like the early days is there's this alternate threads of reality that you're talking about.
Well, let's be honest, John. The media is biased. They have an agenda, and that goes for Fox, and it goes for MSNBC and CNN. They all have an agenda, and they cater to their tribe. I was thinking about this morning driving in, and the idea of tribes, it's not new. The founding fathers, when they were forming our country and forming our Constitution and writing the Federalist Papers, James Madison, who's one of my heroes, he's one of my intellectual heroes, talked about in Federalist 10 the idea of factions. So back in the day, they called tribes factions, but factions have just evolved into the term tribe today, and they're just pandering to their tribe. Right. Okay. I like to say we're a tribe of individuals here, our alternative media, because we're talking to the individual. We're not talking to a group, right? Like a monolithic group. We are individualists at heart. Okay. I don't want to tell you what to do. I don't want you to tell me what to do. Right. But it seems like, to be honest, the media wants everybody to get in line. And, there's been the two scariest surveys and polls that I have seen in the past 2 years. One was by Rasmussen, which was released in January of 2022. And they did a poll. They polled, Republicans, Democrats, Independents. And one of the questions was, should the government quarantine in internment camps, essentially, people who are unvaccinated? 48% of Democrats said yes. Think about that for a second. That's terrifying. Yeah. And there was a recent poll survey that just came out recently, like in the past week. It was like 38% of Democrats think Americans have too much freedom. Think about that for a second. Too much freedom? I don't think we have enough freedom. So, that's where we are in terms of the newsletter industry. Our core beliefs is, absolute freedom, free thinking. One of our slogans here is I have a slogan that I came up with was create, liberate, and prosper. When you liberate the mind, the human mind, and allow that individual to innovate and create and be free thinking, magical things happen. Magical things happen. And I think we have to get back to that more, is allowing our citizens to be free thinkers, individualists, and pursue happiness.
Nice. And I mean, there's a lot of people who, like marketers, will talk about relationship building, but I mean that's the essence of what you're doing here. Is you're identifying people who resonate with your worldview, and that is the ultimate kind of relationship builder. And you're saying, come along with us. There is this financial analyst side where we're going to translate these complicated kind of economic and financial investing kind of information and forecasts into an understandable thing for somebody who's not a specialist. There is the element of like, we're great marketers. We know when to talk about what and how to go about it. But at the heart of it, all of that is in service of building that relationship with the reader or the customer fundamentally through our ideas and way of looking at the world.
Absolutely. Again, it goes back to those philosophical anchors. We're not just financial analysts. We're not just, recommending stocks. It's a way of life. It's a way of living. It's a way of thinking. I don't want to say anybody can recommend stocks, but right now we're competing with a bunch of a bunch of traders online. I see them on TikTok all the time. I see them on YouTube all the time. We just went through a period where, GameStop was making headlines because all these youngsters were trying to stick it to hedge funds and to Wall Street. And I don't want to be that. That's not me. That's not us.
Yeah.
Okay? Let them do their thing. I have loftier goals. Mm-hmm. Okay? And so I think that's where our industry sort of went awry. We went in a different direction. We went, oh, okay. Let me show you options that's going to make you 30,000%. Mm-hmm. Well, how does that fit into our philosophical view of the world? Because for me, and we did it here at Angel. We did. We actually went.
Everyone did.
Everyone did.
Yeah.
I hated it.
Yeah.
I was just, every time a piece of copy came across my desk and the headline was like, make 25,000%, blah, blah, blah. I was like, you know what? I hate this. You're telling me it's going to work. We're going to do it.
So.
And now we find ourselves right now, John, in this period where we're trying to recapture our identity. Mm-hmm. And as we were talking earlier, John, you have to believe it. You have to actually feel it. You can't fake it.
Right.
Because people who fake it, your customer's going to see right through that.
Yeah, and that's where, so I see I see the way that this approach to publishing pulls through the marketing metrics, right? Like the 30,000% gains on options. Anytime you're selling based on track record, you have a customer who's loyal to the track record. They're loyal, and they're hoping for the biggest gain that you said, because that's what you said. Well, this could be this much. So anything below that is fundamentally kind of a disappointment, even though they know that, like, hey, that's not likely, but like it's a disappointment. Like, it's not fulfilling. And so customers who are loyal to the track record are not loyal to the brand, to the idea, to the editor, because they don't share your worldview necessarily, because you never talk about it.
Right.
And so how can they build a relationship around that? And so as soon as you have a bad time in the market, which everybody has universally, then you lose that customer because I can go get better gains over here right now because it's all just about that.
Right.
And so, yeah, it pulls through just right away in the relationship.
Maybe I'm wrong, but I think brand is more important than track record. And so, there's probably times when that balance is, goes the other way. But one of our, historically, one of our best performing, we have pretty much three divisions here at Angel. And one of our best performing divisions was something called the Outsider Club. Okay. That had a very, very defined brand. Now,
because you'll never be on the inside.
Because you'll never be on the inside, which I hate that tagline anyway, but we're in the process of changing that. But stock recommendations weren't, they weren't, home runs all the time. They weren't home runs, nearly any time. But it was just the emotional connection that division, the editors had with their subscribers was super, super strong.
Yeah.
And it kind of reminded me, it made me a little bit nostalgic of my early years at Agora in 94 and 95 and 96, when you had the Doug Caseys and the Adrian Days and the Bill Bonners and, this whole bullpen of contrarians and people who, when I started at Agora in 94, I was still in graduate school. And my first day there, they were giving me all these materials to read, and I was like, what the fuck is this? This is a real company? Like, what are they promoting here? What are they? But the more I read and the more I talked to people there, the more I bought into the idea. Mm-hmm. And then I had a conversion.
Yeah.
I had a baptism, so to speak. And then I never looked back. So, and that's, if I can give Bill Bonner one big credit to my life, was he opened my eyes on a lot of things, on society, culture, economics. I got the best education there at Agora in my early years than I ever did in graduate school.
Yeah.
I did. I really did.
There's something about that when, like, you have an experience where, like, you have this sense that something's not right in the world around you.
Right.
And then somebody clarifies where the problem is. Mm-hmm. And all of a sudden it makes sense. Like, that moment of enlightenment, that moment of that spark, that like you ground to that person in that lesson so emotionally, because it's changed the way you've seen the world. And to me, that is the essence of what you're trying to have with the customer right there. And great copy, like, really great copy, when it hits, like, it changes the way that you think about something. Mm-hmm. And it's like, you can never go back to ignorance, because it's opened your eyes to look at things in a way that is different. Like, this possibility that you didn't think was possible is there, or this opportunity, or this explanation for why there was a problem that you didn't realize.
A good, we talked about being philosophers. Mm-hmm. Plato's analogy of the cave. Are you familiar with that? Oh,
very, very familiar with that.
I think that's our role as newsletter editors.
I agree. I think that's it. Yeah.
Mankind is chained, going down into a cave. It's dark, and he sees glimpses of reality on the cave wall from the fire. Mm-hmm. And the only way he can free himself and become truly enlightened is to break himself free from those chains that's basically chaining mankind down to the depths of hell.
Yeah.
And a good example, John, and I'm probably going to get some pushback. I might get some agreement. because it's still fresh in everybody's mind, was COVID.
Yeah.
If COVID was a test to mankind, we failed. We fucking failed.
In what ways?
Well, we just listened to the so-called experts, and we just accepted what they told us to do. Okay? Now, disclaimer, I did my part. I was like, okay, two weeks to flatten the curve. 2 weeks. I still have, on my wall, I still have the press release from our governor here in Maryland said, schools and businesses will shut down for 2 weeks, and then we'll reopen.
Right.
After 2 weeks. Never happened.
Yeah.
Right? 2 weeks turned into 4 weeks, turned into 2 months, turned into 4 months. In some states, it turned into 2 years. Okay? And, I guess the education I got from like Bill Bonner and Al Gore about having a healthy skepticism and cynicism about authority, at some point I was like, what the hell's going on here?
Right.
What the hell? And so, luckily, I'm a lucky one. I have a house in Florida. So in May of 2020, when the North was completely locked down, I got the kids and the wife and the dog into our SUV, drove down to Florida. Florida was open, and it was like night and day.
Yeah.
And so then you get to then you realize, okay, there are places that have different philosophies.
Yeah.
And a different governing philosophy.
Right.
So if COVID was a test model, God help us.
Yeah. That's so I think Brian Hunt, the conversation I posted not too long ago, who's the publisher over at Alta, or CEO there, mentioned this too, that he feels like this is kind of the age of chaos in a sense, is their idea. In that there is this massive and increasing distrust in government institutions, media, the other half of the country. In this mistrust is very there's a lot of fear, there's a lot of anger, there's a lot of confusion, and people are looking for ways to understand, and then through understanding navigate their life.
Right.
And that's newsletters to me, is we have a perspective on this moment in time.
Yes.
Within the context of history. I used to love reading Bill Bonner, Addison, other the early newsletter world to me, you reference history, you poke holes in economic fallacies that are held up, right? There's the Austrian versus the money printers, schools of economics. You had ideas, and it was there was an intellectual thing, and you had the context of history, right? You talk about people saying, well, we have too much freedom. Well, that within the context of how's that worked out in the past, it's terrifying.
It's murderous.
Right.
So again, I'll go back to Al Gore and Bill Bonner. For me, it was an epiphany. And my degrees, my undergrad and graduate degrees, are in political philosophy, and that I had also economics, and I never was exposed to the Austrian School of Economics ever in school. So it's, in my opinion, so John, we call this the corruption through collusion. Government, mainstream media. You said it's the other half of the nation, and we could call that anything, pretty much. Wokeism, just progressivism, liberalism, whatever. Static thinking. The other one, in my opinion, is also Wall Street. That's the four-headed monster, and Wall Street kind of gets left out of that, but they're just as bad as all of them. Because I think I read something, the S&P 500 is owned by 88% of the S&P 500 is owned by 4 firms: Vanguard, BlackRock, State Street, and I forget who the other one is. Yeah. And if you don't think you're not being controlled and manipulated by them, you know, you're sadly mistaken. So, and they're all in cahoots together, all in cahoots. They want to hold on to power and everything.
So I have my own theory of good government, and it's basically that in every system, I don't care what it is, power aggregates. And so the only good government is government that disaggregates the power. It slows the aggregation of power, and then has mechanisms to disaggregate the power. And without that, you always have some form of an oligarchy, some form of a government that tries to take control, goes to tyranny, whatever. And any late stage cycle is going to have power aggregated into the hands of a very small group of people who have an extraordinary influence. And you don't need to be a conspiracy theorist to realize they just have a worldview and an interest that they are then imposing on all of their actions. But because they have so much influence, it's imposed on all of us.
Absolutely. And if we go back to the founding fathers, people don't realize just how genius they were in developing our government. It was, they understood the corruption of power in concentrated hands. That's why they built a federal government, 3 different branches, okay, checks and balances, separation of powers, and even that was within a sphere of what we call federalism, state government versus national government.
Right.
Okay. And there's times when I'm really just down on my fellow Americans. I think they just want like a powerful king, telling them what to do.
Yeah, as long as he fits the mold of what I think is right.
What's one of the biggest complaints from the American population when it comes to the federal government? Oh, they can't get anything done. Good. That was the whole point of separation of powers and checks and balances, was that they wanted the federal government not to get big legislation passed. When the government's not messing with, when the government is too busy fighting each other, that's basically the whole concept of separation of powers.
Right.
They're all fighting each other for the power.
Right, so they can't fight us.
They can't fight us. Right. They leave us alone. And that's the beauty of this system, is that while they're fighting each other, and the founding fathers knew they would. From day one, it was like, as soon as that's,
right,
they were going to fight each other. And then we can just go about our lives, pursuing the things that we want to pursue.
Right. And so from a publisher standpoint, what I really appreciate about this is it's having a worldview, and then being able to express it both in the marketing, in the editorial, and in the recommendations. And so that goes back to how you open this up with like the theory of everything. It seems like that theory of everything is like the view, like the position and perspective of the publisher is the unifying theory for the entire business, and either things fit within that worldview or they don't. And your job as a publisher is to make sure that you have such a clearly defined worldview that it can make all of those other 3 things better.
Totally. Yeah, you have to have a very defined ethos, and you really can't stray from it. And I know it's tempting. It's so tempting to stray from that, especially when you see dollar signs. But in my opinion, it's been in my experience with my own company and just seeing our competition, our peers, is that when you stray from your core mission, your USP, whatever it is, long term, it's a fatal mistake. And I'm not going to name a name, but I remember I was talking to somebody who works for one of my competitors. I was like, well, what makes your company? What's so special about your company? What makes it stand out? Couldn't explain it. Could not explain it. And if you can't explain it, John, then
You got a problem.
You have a problem.
Yeah, I think that's particularly a problem with because there's very much a culture of copying in the industry, right? So you have like, well, whose promo's doing what? We're going to copy that. Whose editorial? They have something. Whenever someone has a success, somebody's going to copy it. And, there's intelligent swiping, and then there's, it's a spectrum, right? On one end of the spectrum is, I really don't have the ability to make this decision, so I'm just going to copy somebody else. And I think that culture of copying everybody, like, it takes that problem of having a hodgepodge approach to the business and puts it on steroids. Because now it's just, I'm going to copy him, I'm going to copy him, I'm going to copy him. There's nothing that ties all these things together. I would imagine you've had problems with copywriters in the sense of freelancers who like don't really get the essence of the business and how do they write for it. And then if they can't write for it, then they're going to write what they can try and do to get some success for themselves.
Yep. So
it's
I have 2 points on this, and I want to address this one first, and I want to address the one on why I left Agora. That's going to be my second point. So whenever we contract out with an outside copywriter, we have basically a package of, points, bullet points. Okay, this is what we want. This is what we want the promo to be about. Mm-hmm. And I'm telling you right now, 9 times out of 10, when they hand us their first draft, it is like, what is this? What is this? Like, well, are they trying to, impress us with their copy prowess or ideas? Well, we know it works, okay? And the reason why we're using an outside copywriter is because we have an idea, but we just don't have the in-house staff to do it, so we have to farm it out. So that's been one of our biggest problems, and it's been a problem for a long time. Just stick to the script. And there is some liberty to do stuff with the for the copywriter to do, but when they change the big idea,
right,
and they go off on a tangent, that's where we waste so much time and so much money, and with copywriters who just do not stick to the script. On my second point, that I left Agora in 2003. For a few reasons. One of the reasons was I saw and I'm a big, I love competition. I believe in the spirit of competition. But then what I saw our competitors within Agora doing, all these other divisions, they were starting to go off they were starting to go off. They had lost the plot, so to speak, and they were chasing the easy buck. And they were losing their soul. There was no philosophical anchors. And even within the division that I was working for was starting to go off the rails. Mm-hmm. And I still had things to say personally and philosophically. And it just didn't fit the mold of where Agora was going. And so that's when I left and started Angel Publishing. And the rest has been history, so to speak.
Yeah. So when you did start Angel Publishing, how did that start for you? How did so you go off and start your own? Like, what did you do to get the business off the ground?
Well, I had two business partners who were also ex-Agora, and one guy in particular was an expert in mining. Like he went to the Colorado School of Mines, graduated from there. Just a super intellect in terms of everything, natural resources, and that's how we built the company. Was on the back of a singular idea of that we were about to go into a severe energy crisis. We did it through IR money, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
So companies that wanted, investor relations exposure basically financed our startup. It was beautiful.
Yeah.
And within a few years, we didn't need IR money because we were standing on our own 2 feet with just our, the paid, subscription model. And I don't think we've done any IR since then.
It's such an interesting thing because when you're starting out, like a lot of these smaller publishers, like you need an alternate revenue source, whether
Mm-hmm.
it's some advertising usually is the thing,
Mm-hmm.
to be able to help you cash flow operations so that you can put money back in to acquire customers.
Yep.
And you hit the right. I mean, thematically, that 2000 to 2008 was the rise of China, and resource stories related to that. I mean, that is the macro theme that dominated that period of time.
Yeah.
And either if anyone, it's kind of like the lesson from today with AI and other things is, timing is so important. And if you don't get those major trends right and you don't have anything to say about those things, then you can't really capitalize on that attention. But you guys did that fantastic during that period. There was, if you were in some version of a resource story related to the rise of China, then what were you even doing in publishing at that point?
So there's another legend in our business who has now become a pariah in our industry, Mark Faber, Dr. Mark Faber, who lives in Asia. I don't even know if he's still alive, to be honest with you.
Actually.
But he wrote a book a few decades ago. I think it's called Tomorrow. It was called Tomorrow. It's called Tomorrow's Gold.
Mm-hmm.
And he really made just a really persuasive case that bull markets never end. They just go to a different asset class. And he went back in history and said, in the 1950s it was this, in the 1960s it was IBM and computers, in the 1970s it was commodities, And that really stuck with me as a professional investor, as a professional market philosopher. I understand that it's just human nature to be in a bull market somewhere.
Right.
And just to give you one example, John, is and I hate going back to COVID, but I'm going to go back to COVID. So in February and March, the market was freaking out about COVID. Stocks were tanking. And I think in March of 2020, I sent out basically like a white paper to within the company here.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, we're going bullish. We're gonna start buying. And I can't tell you to tell your customers, your subscribers to buy, but that's what I am personally doing, and that's where I think it's what's going to happen. There's way too much fear in the market.
Mm-hmm.
And it paid off in spades. I mean, I personally, there's been, I just make sure I want to make sure. There's been 3 times in my investing career there's been opportunities to make generational wealth.
Mm-hmm.
Well, maybe 4. In '94, when I started Agora, we were coming out of a recession, but I wasn't a seasoned investor really at all. But that was a time to really ride that .com wave.
Yeah.
That was one way to make generational wealth. The other one was right after 9/11. The other one was after the financial crash of 2009, and the other one was when the COVID crash. That was generational. Like if you had a big cash stockpile just sitting there waiting, and you went into the market at that time, you're basically set for life.
Right.
So I call it the opportunity of big events.
Mm-hmm.
And so, they're you could call them maybe black swan events, but those are the opportunity of big events, and they're going to always continue. And humans are going to react the same way they always reacted before. They're going to panic, and there's going to be some people, a small group of people, who are going to keep their cool, keep their head, and buy the fear.
Right. And that's worldview too.
That's worldview too.
That's worldview, getting down into kind of the nuts and bolts of how do you manage and navigate markets.
Yeah.
And having a perspective on that inside a worldview about how everything else works.
Did I ever tell you the story when I fired my financial advisor?
No.
All right, so this is a story that I tell all the time. It's a true story. My story hasn't changed since 2008. But I'm embarrassed to tell you, John, that I actually used to use a financial advisor because I was too lazy to do it on my own. Mm-hmm. Okay, so I'm driving back one day from I had a beach house in Bethany Beach, Delaware, and I was driving back on a Friday or whatever. I don't know what day it was. And I'm getting this phone call from my financial advisor. And I'm not picking this up. And it was on a day when the market was even crashing even more. And there was many crashes during that year. And he kept calling. And so I finally answered the phone. And he's literally in tears on the other line. It's like, Brian, where's the bottom? Where do you think it's going to be? Where, I was like, and here I am. I'm his client.
Right.
And and I had to calm him down. And so this went on for a while. And prior to that phone call, like I had been telling him, hey, get me out of everything. Put me in cash or put me in like some sort of, precious gold metal fund or whatever. I don't remember. And he kept talking me out of it. Nah, Brian, you're panicking. It's gonna be fine. It's gonna be fine. This went on for like 6 months. And finally I was like, look, if you don't do this, you're fired. Just get me out of everything and put me in, a money market fund or a cash fund. He finally did it. And then 6 months later, I got the phone call from him crying. And I was like, that's it. I got to take over. I got to take over everything on my. And it was a blessing in disguise, So, and that was, that's part of the whole Wall Street, the Wall Street collusion thing that I was talking about, is the whole financial advisory kind of, business. They're just basically salesmen for funds. They don't understand worldview or, like the nuances of, of all that. They're just there to sell funds and collect a commission on both sides of the equation. So,
yeah, no, I think that's true. I think that, but those stories, those kind of like, it's like a teaching story for people about like how to again understand why the worldview that you have is the worldview that you have, and it's got to be phenomenal for editorial. And it's part of that relationship building because how many other people have had similar experiences with their advisors telling them, oh, you're just panicking, or like putting their faith in an advisor and then losing so much and then being like, what the hell?
Right. Totally. Yeah. And in 2007, John, I have another story. We saw this financial crisis coming. So we were predicting it. And, we were of the opinion, like, we have to have cash. And not just cash in the bank, but cash in our safe at the house. So, I would be in the office and I would ring up my wife. I was like, "Hun, go to the bank and withdraw $5,000." The first time she did it, they turned her down. They turned her away. They was like, "We don't have that kind of cash here. That kind. You have to you have to schedule it." So she put in a request. I'll come back in a few days and I want $5,000.
Yeah.
I made her do that like 10 times. And she was telling me the story. She's like, man, every time I come into the bank teller's like, oh, Mrs. Hicks. But I was like, I don't care. Get cash. And in 2008, John, next to my guns in my safe, I had $100,000 in cash and $100,000 in gold bars. And I always tell people, the time the time to be accumulating this stuff is during time of safety and peace. Because if you don't have it and the shit hits the fan, you're too late. You're out of luck.
Yeah, I always think of it like we're almost the late '80s and the '90s really spoiled us.
Yeah,
because I think of like the '90s is kind of like this, almost like a golden age in the sense that we were the first true like unipolar superpower. The economy was growing, things were good. It seemed like things were going to be like, it was that end of history moment, right?
Yeah.
And then we forget that most of history, ours included, is violent. It's rights getting taken away. Like, we weren't even allowed to invest in gold legally at one point. You had internment camps in the U.S. You had civil war. You had all these things that happen. And we think that, like, no, everything's going to be great. And so that's part of the blessing of age, is you realize that, like, or the curse, that things aren't as safe as as you want them to be.
No, not at all. I remember I was listening to a college professor who was very, very astute in terms of international relations, and he said the worst thing that ever happened to the world may have been the fall of the USSR. And he made this argument. This was after 9/11. He was like, the reason why Osama bin Laden, and Al Qaeda attacked us is because that group could no longer play the U.S. off the Soviet Union because there was no Soviet Union. So they had to do something to stir the pot, and they attacked us. And we've been fighting that. We've been fighting this thing now for going into the third decade.
Yeah.
So you're right about that. It's the history of man, the history of the world, is one of conflict, constant conflict, and that's never ever ever going to change, in my opinion. The peace dividend, the peace dividend, remember that we had in the 1990s, that lasted for 8-9 years, and now we're back at it again.
Well, that's why I also feel like we're also in this period of time where it's like this. I keep saying this is a newsletters writers market, and not just market world,
it
right?
is.
Because you've got this transformation of the geopolitical situation, fundamental transformation. We're in essentially a third or a second Cold War with China. You have the restructuring of global supply changes and all the impacts of what that is. We are in a time when we're in a time when history is active. It's happening right now.
Yeah.
And that means confusion. It means opportunity. It means that safety, things that you think are safe are not safe. This is a newsletter writer. This is an idea person's market.
Right. I will go. I have this calculation about how the four-headed monster of corruption, of collusion, kind of gets its way. I call it the 5 C's. First C is crisis. They manufacture a crisis. It might be a real crisis. Who knows? But they love crisis. The second one is through their they start to mobilize their minions through the corruption through collusion, the media, government, Wall Street, the mob. And then the third one is they instill confusion and chaos in you and into the population, to the point where the fourth C, happened, which is you comply, you capitulate. And then the fifth C is what they really want. It's an easy, you probably can guess that one. What's the fifth C? Control. They want total, absolute control of you. And it's a great system for them. It's a model that works.
Yeah.
It works time and time again.
Was it? I'm not sure if he. Right now, I'm drawing a blank, but I know Rahm Emanuel said it. Whether he was quoting someone else or not, he did say, never let a good crisis go to waste.
Absolutely, yeah. Never let a good. And I'm building. Right now. I have a promo that's in production right now, and we're designing this image of the for the past 30 years, how many crises, epidemics, and panics have occurred, and it's literally nonstop. Everything's an epidemic. Everything's a a panic. Everything's a crisis. The lantern moth right now is a crisis.
The murder hornets. It's like we really want some insect to come in and destroy everything. Right? There's always there's the murder hornets, or there's some animal. There was the snakeheads.
The Japanese beetle.
Yeah. But so I guess we can keep going on this. I don't want to, but kind of to wrap up, going back to capturing the soul, or not capturing, finding our soul again as an industry in publishing. I think that your point is, I'd never really thought about it that way, but I think you're totally right that we have lost our soul in that sense, in that we've lost worldview, we've lost perspective on having perspective, because we're chasing marketing opportunities, we're chasing media buying, we're chasing technical marketing things, we're chasing just whatever new trend happens without putting it within the context of a greater idea, because an AI promo is going to sell when AI promos sell, and so a copywriter doesn't think that, or even editors don't think that they have to contextualize that.
Right.
But building a community, building a tribe, building a faction.
At the end of the day, our readers look to us to make sense of the world, and if we stray from that mission, and I'll be honest with you, it's hard not to go after the easy dollar. It really is. But I think that we have to maintain our integrity, even if that means missing out on marketing dollars, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
I think so. Because I think at the end of the day, it's going to pay off. You're going to be proven right. More people are going to come and subscribe to your service because they want to listen to you.
Mm-hmm.
They're just as fearful as anybody else. They want clarity. They want somebody to make sense of it all. And I'm not saying that we have all the answers, but we have some of them,
Mm-hmm.
you know? And if we don't have the answers, I have questions. And that was the one thing that lacked during the COVID was you weren't allowed to ask questions.
Right.
Right?
That's always the terrifying thing is when you're not allowed to ask a question.
Right.
Yeah.
So I agree with you, John. I think I say it all the time though, in every period of Angel's history, but it's a great time to be in this business. It really is. I'm excited. Really excited.
Yeah, no, I think that's like never let a good crisis go to waste.
Yep.
But no, I appreciate you taking the time to talk about this because it's so interesting to me because there are so few people left right now that can have a conversation about this.
Right.
A lot of the old kind of OGs in the industry are kind of semi or retiring. We had the longest bull market in history with, crypto and cannabis and kind of these explosions of trends and there was a lot of talk about just like pushing, or not to talk, there's a lot of promos that were just kind of like, there was no worldview needed because the trends was so big and so strong and there was so much FOMO in there. Yep. And then we have this reset period where it's like, wait, like things aren't working. If you're losing customers right now, and this is the difference I think is your renewals are the business in a sense. Mm-hmm. And if you don't have that like worldview to keep people in, like your renewals on, again, just trading track record, when the market goes south and your gains don't pick up or aren't doing good, you're not keeping those customers.
Right.
And so there's
it's always the connection and if we're going to end this interview, I'm going to end it with Bob Ross. Bob Ross has a devoted following 30 years after his death.
Yes.
He has just his whole persona, his whole business model is absolutely perfect. So tell our editors to be Bob Ross.
Be Bob Ross. If you're going to be anybody, be Bob Ross.
Yep.
I love that. That's a great way to end. So thank you, Brian.
Absolutely.
Appreciate it.